The massive transport ship Galactic Unity hummed through the void between star systems, carrying diplomatic representatives from 12 different species toward the neutral station of Kepler, 442b. Commander Thexera of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted her crystalline breathing apparatus as she reviewed the mission briefings one final time. The upcoming peace negotiations would determine the fate of 3 contested star systems, and tensions ran high among all parties involved. The Zephyrians, with their towering insectoid frames and razor-sharp mandibles, had dominated galactic warfare for over 2 centuries. Their warriors were legendary throughout known space. Beings who could survive in the vacuum of space for short periods, whose exoskeletons could deflect plasma rounds, and whose battle fury was spoken of in hushed whispers across 1,000 worlds. Beside them sat the hulking Krovar delegation, their thick gray hides scarred from countless battles. These bear-like giants stood nearly 3 meters tall and possessed strength that could crush steel with their bare hands. Their homeworld's gravity was 4 times that of most inhabited planets, making them living tanks in any conflict. The sleek Vorthan representatives whispered among themselves in their melodic language, their serpentine bodies coiled gracefully around specialized seating. Masters of stealth and assassination, they could move through shadows like liquid death and strike with venoms that could fell creatures 10 times their size. Even the peaceful-looking Celestians, despite their ethereal appearance and floating movements, commanded respect. Their telepathic abilities could crush minds from across star systems, and their energy manipulation had leveled entire fleets during the Sigma Centauri conflict. And then there are the humans. The other delegations had studied the files extensively. Humans came from a planet designated as a class, 12 Deathworld by galactic standards, a classification so extreme that most species considered it uninhabitable. The reports spoke of a world where the very air was corrosive to many species, where the gravity was crushing, where deadly radiation bombarded the surface daily, and where the native life forms were so violently aggressive that they regularly consumed each other for survival. The humans themselves appeared deceptively fragile. No natural armor, no claws, no visible weapons, no apparent psychic abilities. They stood barely 2 meters tall on average, with soft pink or brown skin that seemed vulnerable to the slightest damage. Yet somehow, these soft creatures had not only survived on their nightmare world, but had thrived enough to develop space travel and join the galactic community. What made them particularly unsettling was their behavior. While other species had evolved specialized traits for warfare, the Zephyrians' armored exoskeletons, the Krovar's massive strength, the Vorthan's natural stealth capabilities, humans seemed to have evolved something far more disturbing. In complete absence of normal fear responses and an apparent enjoyment of danger. The delegation consisted of 3 humans. Ambassador Sarah Chun, a small female with dark hair and unervingly steady eyes. General Marcus Rodriguez, a broad-shouldered male with scars covering his visible skin, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, a middle-aged woman whose calm demeanor somehow made her more intimidating than her companions. As the ship approached the space station, the various species maintained careful distances from each other. The Zephyrians clicked their mandibles nervously. The Krovar growled low warnings when others came too close. The Vorthans remained coiled and ready to strike. The Celestians floated in meditation, but their energy fields flickered with barely contained power. The humans, however, seemed utterly relaxed. They chatted casually among themselves, occasionally laughing at something one of them said. When Ambassador Chun smiled and nodded politely at Commander Thexera, the Zephyrian felt an involuntary shudder run through her exoskeleton. That smile should have been reassuring, but something about the way it didn't quite reach the human's eyes made it deeply unsettling. The docking procedure went smoothly, and soon all delegations were aboard the neutral station. The Galactic Council had spared no expense in ensuring comfort for all species. Varied atmospheric zones, adjustable gravity fields, and Most importantly, separate dining facilities that could accommodate the drastically different nutritional needs of each species. The schedule was simple: 3 days of preliminary meetings, followed by formal negotiations. But first, as was traditional in galactic diplomacy, there would be a shared meal where all species would demonstrate their cultures and hopefully build some initial trust. As the various delegations settled into their assigned quarters, word spread through the station's corridors about the upcoming cultural exchange dinner. The other species began preparing their finest delicacies and most impressive cultural displays, each hoping to establish psychological dominance through superior cuisine and presentation. None of them realized that the humans had politely declined to participate in the formal dinner, requesting instead to prepare something they called breakfast for the following morning. The station's administrators had agreed, without much thought, assuming it would be some sort of simple morning ceremony. They had no idea what they had just agreed to witness. The formal cultural dinner had proceeded exactly as expected. Each species presented their finest offerings with great ceremony and subtle intimidation tactics. The Zephyrians served crystallized protein formations that sparked with electrical energy, demonstrating their ability to consume foods that would electrocute most other species. The Crovar brought forth massive haunches of barely cooked meat from predators that could hunt starships, tearing into them with their bare claws, while maintaining unwavering eye contact with their potential enemies. The Vorthans offered delicate arrangements of what appeared to be living vegetables that continued moving even as they were consumed, showcasing their mastery over biological systems. The Celestians presented pure energy formations that took the shape of food, glowing with inner light that hurt to look at directly, proving their transcendence of normal physical needs. Through it all, the 3 humans sat politely, sampling small portions of each offering with what appeared to be genuine curiosity and appreciation. Ambassador Chen even complimented the Zephyrian delegation on the interesting electrical sensation of their food, causing several Zephyrians to exchange confused clicks. General Rodriguez nodded approvingly at the Crovar's raw meat display, mentioning something about good marbling that the translators struggled to interpret. Dr. Vasquez took detailed notes on each presentation, occasionally asking questions about preparation methods and nutritional content that seemed far too technical for casual dinner conversation. Her questions revealed an unsettling depth of knowledge about biochemistry and toxicology that made the other delegations increasingly uncomfortable. As the formal dinner concluded, Ambassador Chen stood and addressed the gathering with perfect diplomatic grace. Thank you all for sharing your wonderful cultural foods with us. We're honored to experience such diversity. Tomorrow morning, we'd like to return the favor by preparing what we call breakfast for anyone who would like to join us. Nothing too elaborate, just some simple foods from our homeworld. The way she said simple food from our homeworld caused a collective shiver to run through the assembled delegates. Simple foods from Class 12 Deathworld could mean almost anything, and none of it was likely to be actually simple. Commander Thexera found herself speaking before she could stop herself. What exactly does this breakfast consist of? Dr. Vasquez smiled, that same unsettling human smile. Oh, just some basics. We brought eggs from our homeworld, some fruits, vegetables, beverages. Standard breakfast items. We thought it might be interesting for you to experience what we consider normal morning nutrition. The word normal hung in the air like a threat. What these Deathworld survivors considered normal could very well be lethal to species that had evolved on more reasonable planets. But backing down now would show weakness, and none of these warrior species could afford to appear weak in front of their enemies. One by one, each delegation accepted the invitation, though with varying degrees of hidden reluctance. That night, the station's corridors buzzed with nervous energy. Warriors who had faced down battleship squadrons and planetary invasions found themselves anxious about a simple meal. The Zephyrians held emergency tactical meetings to discuss potential threats. The Crovar sharpened their claws and performed ritual preparations for battle. The Vorthans slithered through the shadows, gathering intelligence about human food preparation methods. Even the Celestians increased their meditative practices, preparing their minds for whatever psychic assault might come disguised as breakfast. Meanwhile, in the human quarters, the three representatives unpacked their supplies with casual efficiency. The containers they opened bore warning labels in multiple languages: extreme temperature, biological hazard, pressurized contents, toxic to most species. Yet the humans handled everything with the same care one might show when arranging flowers. General Rodriguez held up a large, oval-shaped object covered in brown spots. "Think they'll be ready for real coffee?" Ambassador Chun laughed. "Marcus, half of them probably think our tap water is poison. Let's start small and work our way up." Dr. Vasquez was examining a collection of brightly colored spherical objects. "I brought several varieties of fruit. The capsaicin levels should be manageable for most species, though the Celestians might have trouble with the citrus acids." They spoke as if they were discussing party favors rather than substances that could potentially hospitalize their guests. As the station's artificial night cycle progressed, sleep came fitfully to the non-human delegations. Dreams filled with visions of humans casually consuming molten metal and breathing poison gas. The rational parts of their minds knew these were exaggerations, but their instincts screamed warnings about the upcoming meal. The humans, by contrast, slept peacefully, completely unaware of the terror they had inadvertently inspired. Morning arrived with the station's artificial sun slowly brightening the main diplomatic hall. The various delegations arrived in full ceremonial gear, treating the breakfast invitation like a formal military engagement. Bodyguards flanked each group. Medical teams stood ready. Some delegations had even brought portable atmosphere processors in case the human food proved too toxic for normal breathing. The humans arrived last, dressed in simple clothing and carrying what appeared to be basic food preparation equipment. They seemed genuinely pleased to see such a large turnout and began setting up their breakfast preparation area with efficient, practiced movements. "Thank you all for coming," Ambassador Chen called out cheerfully. "We're excited to share some of our favorite morning foods with you. Please, make yourselves comfortable while we prepare everything. This shouldn't take long." As the humans began their preparations, the other delegations watched with growing fascination and horror. What they witnessed would challenge everything they thought they knew about biology, chemistry, and the fundamental nature of survival itself. The first sign that something extraordinary was about to happen came when General Rodriguez casually picked up what looked like a small metallic cylinder and began manipulating it with his bare hands. The sound that emerged was a sharp, violent hissing that caused every warrior in the room to instinctively reach for weapons that weren't there. "Just opening a can of tomatoes," he explained cheerfully to the suddenly tense audience. The fact that humans stored their food in metal containers that required violent destruction to access was noted with growing alarm. Dr. Vasquez had begun arranging her selection of fruits on a preparation surface. To the assembled delegates, they looked like biological weapons. Spherical objects in blazing reds and oranges, their surfaces gleaming with what could only be toxic secretions. Some are covered in thick, armor-like skins that she began removing with a sharp metal blade, revealing flesh so intensely colored it seemed to glow with inner fire. "These are oranges from our home world," she explained, holding up one of the flame-colored spheres, packed with ascorbic acid and citrus oils. "Wonderful for morning nutrition." Commander Thexera's translation unit struggled with the term ascorbic acid, finally settling on corrosive chemical compound. The Zephyrian delegation exchanged nervous clicks. Acid was used for dissolving armor and melting through hull plating, not for nutrition. But the true horror began when Ambassador Chun started working with what she called eggs. The objects she removed from a cooling container were oval-shaped and pure white, looking innocuous enough until she explained their origin. "These are chicken eggs from Earth. Chickens are small flying predators that we domesticated for food production." The idea that humans had domesticated flying predators was disturbing enough, but what Ambassador Chun did next defied all logic. She took one of the white, oval objects and struck it sharply against the edge of a metal bowl. The shell cracked with a sound like breaking bones, and she proceeded to tear it apart with her bare fingers. What poured out was a viscous, translucent fluid surrounding a brilliant orange-yellow core that looked disturbingly like a miniature sun. The smell that rose from this substance caused several Vorthans to recoil in instinctive fear. It was organic, yes, but wrong somehow. Too rich, too complex, carrying undertones that triggered every prey instinct they possessed. The beautiful thing about eggs, Ambassador Chun continued conversationally as she cracked several more, is that they're essentially concentrated life force. Everything needed to create a living creature packed into one convenient package. She was casually destroying potential life forms and preparing to consume their essence. The Celestians' energy fields flickered with distress at the philosophical implications alone. But then General Rodriguez began preparing what he called coffee, and the situation escalated beyond anything the assembled warriors could have imagined. He started with small, dark objects that looked like seeds or perhaps tiny pieces of charcoal. The smell that rose from them when he began heating them was unlike anything in the galactic database. Rich, complex, containing chemical compounds that seemed designed to trigger both attraction and warning responses simultaneously. "These are coffee beans," he explained, apparently unaware that his audience had begun backing away involuntarily. "We roast them at extremely high temperatures to break down their cellular structure and release the flavor compounds." He was describing controlled molecular destruction as if it were a pleasant hobby. The roasted beans went into a metal device that General Rodriguez activated with casual efficiency. The sound it made was like a miniature war zone, grinding, crushing, pulverizing. He was reducing organic matter to powder using what appeared to be portable siege equipment. "The grinding breaks down the cell walls," he continued over the mechanical violence. "Increases surface area for optimal extraction." Extraction. He was using military terminology to describe food preparation. The ground coffee went into another metal device, where General Rodriguez poured boiling water over it. The resulting liquid was dark as the void between stars and smelled like it could dissolve hull plating. Steam rose from it carrying chemical signatures that made the station's air recycling systems trigger contamination warnings. Dr. Vasquez had moved on to preparing something she called bacon, and the smell filling the hall was unlike anything the assembled delegates had ever encountered. It was the scent of controlled combustion, of animal fat being deliberately burned, of proteins being subjected to extreme thermal stress until they transformed into something that shouldn't exist in nature. Pork belly, cured with salt and smoke, then cooked until the fat renders and the proteins caramelize, she explained, using terminology that sounded more like industrial chemistry than food preparation. The sight of her casually manipulating strips of what was obviously animal muscle tissue that had been treated with preservative chemicals and then subjected to controlled burning was profoundly disturbing. Yet she handled the sizzling, popping strips as if they weren't trying to burn her fingers off. Meanwhile, Ambassador Chun had poured her egg mixture into a heated metal pan where it began to transform. The liquid became solid through the application of thermal energy, changing color and texture while releasing steam and chemical compounds that made the air itself seem heavier. "Scrambled eggs," she announced, stirring the transforming mass with a metal implement. "The heat denatures the proteins and coagulates the albumin, one of humanity's most basic breakfast staples." She was describing controlled protein destruction using scientific terminology that most of the assembled delegates associated with biological warfare research. The three humans worked with calm efficiency, completely unaware that they were demonstrating what appeared to be the most sophisticated and terrifying food preparation techniques ever witnessed. They manipulated fire, chemicals, extreme temperatures, and biological materials with the same casual competence that other species use to operate starship controls. And through it all, they maintained pleasant conversation, occasionally laughing at shared jokes, while surrounded by the sounds and smells of what could only be described as organized culinary violence. The assembled alien warriors, who had faced down everything from plasma bombardments to psychic attacks, found themselves paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. The moment of truth arrived when the humans began serving their breakfast. They moved among the assembled delegates with plates full of what could only be described as the aftermath of culinary warfare, offering samples with bright, encouraging smiles. "Please, try just a small portion," Ambassador Chen urged, approaching the Zephyrian delegation with a plate of scrambled eggs that still steamed with residual heat. "These are very mild by our standards." The phrase "mild by our standards" coming from inhabitants of a class 12 Deathworld was possibly the most terrifying thing Commander Thexera had ever heard. Mild compared to what? What could humans possibly consider extreme if this was their idea of gentle? The Zephyrian commander found herself staring at a small portion of the yellow, fluffy substance on her plate. It looked innocent enough, but the smell rising from it contained chemical complexities that her enhanced senses couldn't fully process. Her species had evolved to detect toxins at the molecular level, yet her sensory apparatus was providing contradictory information. The substance registered as both potentially dangerous and somehow appetizing, a combination that should have been impossible. General Rodriguez approached the Krovar delegation with strips of bacon that were still sizzling audibly. "Careful, it's hot," he warned cheerfully, as if controlled fire wasn't a weapon of war. "The fat content might be rich for some digestive systems, so start small." Warlord Graxtor of the Krovar stared at the offered strip of deliberately burned animal flesh. His people were obligate carnivores who consumed their prey raw and still warm from a kill. The idea of subjecting meat to flame until it changed color and texture was foreign and disturbing. Yet the smell was triggering feeding responses in his brain that he couldn't understand. How could burned meat smell more appealing than fresh prey? Dr. Vasquez moved gracefully between the Vorthins and Celestians, offering selections of fruit that had been cut to reveal their internal structures. "The oranges might be quite acidic for some species," she mentioned casually. "And these strawberries contain natural sugars and aromatic compounds that can be quite intense." To the Vorthins, the revealed fruit flesh looked like biological warfare samples. The oranges wept citric acid that could probably etch metal, while the strawberries were so intensely red they seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Yet Dr. Vasquez had been eating them while she prepared everything else, consuming potential chemical weapons as if they were harmless. But it was the coffee that truly broke their understanding of biological possibility. General Rodriguez poured the dark liquid into small containers and offered them around with obvious pride. "Fresh Ethiopian blend," he announced. "We brought the beans from Earth's highland regions. The growing conditions there are pretty extreme: high altitude, intense solar radiation, volcanic soil." He was describing an environment that sounded like a planetary weapons testing ground, and he was proud that they cultivated food there. The first delegate to actually taste anything was Commander Thexera herself. Military protocol demanded that leaders demonstrate courage in the face of potential threats. She took the smallest possible portion of scrambled egg and placed it in her feeding aperture, expecting either immediate toxicity or at least violent flavor assault. Instead, she experienced something unprecedented. The substance was warm, soft, and carried flavors of incredible complexity. Her taste receptors, evolved to detect thousands of chemical compounds for survival purposes, were suddenly flooded with information. Proteins, fats, minerals, organic compounds she couldn't identify, all somehow balanced into something that was not just edible, but remarkably pleasant. Her involuntary reaction was immediate and visible. Her antenna quivered, her compound eyes dilated, and she made a soft clicking sound that in Zephyrian culture indicated surprised pleasure. This reaction was noted by every other delegate in the room. Warlord Graxtor, seeing that the Zephyrian commander hadn't immediately collapsed or died, cautiously bit into a strip of bacon. The result was even more dramatic. His massive form went completely still as his brain processed flavors that shouldn't exist. The fat content was extraordinary. The salt enhancement triggered feeding responses that hadn't activated since childhood, and the smoky undertones spoke to genetic memories of fire-cooked meat from his species' primitive past. He consumed the entire strip without realizing it, then stared at his empty plate with confusion and what might have been longing. The Vorthons approached their fruit samples with predatory caution, expecting chemical burns or toxic reactions. Instead, they discovered that human fruits contained flavor combinations that were almost psychotropic in their intensity. The citric acid that should have been corrosive instead enhanced and brightened other flavors, while the natural sugars provided energy rushes that left them feeling more alert and aggressive than they had in years. Even the Celestians, who rarely consumed physical matter at all, found themselves fascinated by the energy patterns within the human food. The eggs contained life force signatures that were incredibly complex. The fruits held concentrated solar energy in forms they'd never encountered, and the coffee carried stimulant compounds that actually enhanced their telepathic abilities. But the most shocking revelation came when Ambassador Chen casually poured herself a cup of the coffee and consumed it while continuing to chat pleasantly with her guests. The liquid was still hot enough to cause steam. She drank controlled fire as if it were water. She consumed the molecular warfare substance that was triggering every danger response in the room's most sophisticated warriors, and her only reaction was a satisfied smile and a comment about how the brewing had turned out well. Dr. Vasquez joined her, drinking the dark liquid while simultaneously eating bacon that was still too hot for most species to touch. General Rodriguez did the same while consuming a piece of fruit that was so acidic it should have burned through organic tissue. The three humans stood there casually consuming their breakfast of thermal weapons, chemical compounds, controlled combustion products, and biological warfare agents while maintaining pleasant conversation about the upcoming negotiations. They weren't just surviving their own food, they were enjoying it. The assembled alien warriors, who had come prepared for diplomatic combat and potential military engagement, found themselves completely paralyzed by this demonstration. Not because the humans had threatened them or shown superior weapons or technology, but because they had casually revealed that their normal daily sustenance was more extreme than anything the galaxy's most dangerous species considered survivable. These weren't just inhabitants of a death world. They were creatures so thoroughly adapted to their impossible environment that they had evolved beyond normal biological limitations. They consumed fire, acid, toxins, and concentrated life force as casual morning nutrition. And they had no idea how terrifying this was to everyone else in the room. The silence that fell over the diplomatic hall was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. 12 of the galaxy's most feared warrior species sat motionless, staring at three humans who were peacefully finishing their breakfast while discussing the day's weather patterns with the same casual interest they might show in selecting weapons for battle. Ambassador Chun noticed the unusual quiet and looked up from her second cup of coffee. "Is everything all right? You all seem very contemplative this morning." Contemplative was not the word any of the delegates would have used. Shocked, terrified, fundamentally shaken. These were more accurate descriptions. They had just witnessed something that challenged their basic understanding of biological possibility. The humans hadn't demonstrated superior technology or overwhelming military force. Instead, they had revealed something far more disturbing. They were so thoroughly evolved beyond normal limitations that they could casually consume substances that would kill most species, and they did this every single morning as a matter of routine. Dr. Vasquez finished her orange and smiled at the Celestian delegation. The citric acid content in these is particularly high this season, perfect for morning vitamin absorption. Citric acid. She was discussing industrial solvent consumption as if it were a health benefit. General Rodriguez stretched comfortably and began clearing the breakfast dishes with efficient movements. Nothing like a good meal to start the day right. Really gets the blood flowing. The casual mention of blood circulation while surrounded by the evidence of controlled chemical warfare made several Vorthans hiss involuntarily. Commander Thexera found her voice first, though it came out as a barely audible whisper. "This is what you consume every morning." "Oh, this was actually pretty light," Ambassador Chen replied cheerfully. "We didn't want to overwhelm anyone on the first day. Usually Marcus makes a special hot sauce to go with the eggs, and I like to add some pepper to the coffee, but we thought we'd start with the basics." Hot sauce. Pepper. They had additional chemical weapons they normally added to their morning consumption routine. This breakfast wasn't even representative of their usual dietary extremes. Warlord Graxtor's massive form trembled slightly. His species had conquered 17 star systems through sheer physical dominance and fear. His personal combat record included victories over creatures that could melt steel with their breath and rip through battleship hulls with their claws. Yet sitting here, watching humans casually consume their normal breakfast, had left him feeling more overwhelmed than any battle ever had. "When you say hot sauce," he rumbled carefully, "what exactly do you mean?" General Rodriguez brightened considerably. "Oh, I make my own blend. Ghost peppers, Carolina Reapers, Trinidad scorpions. I grow them in the ship's hydroponics bay. Most humans find it pretty intense, so I don't share it much." The translation units struggled with these terms before settling on concentrated plant-based chemical weapons of increasing toxicity levels. The fact that humans had domesticated multiple varieties of natural poison producers and bred them for increased potency was noted with growing horror. And General Rodriguez grew these things as a hobby. The Vorthan's delegation leader, a sleek creature named Esesestera, slowly uncoiled from her defensive posture. "You mentioned adding pepper to coffee. What type of pepper?" "Usually just black pepper," Ambassador Chen said, as if this were the most normal thing in the galaxy. "Sometimes white pepper if I want a cleaner heat profile. Keeps the coffee from being too bland." She was describing flavor enhancement through the addition of organic irritants. Her species' taste receptors were so deadened by constant exposure to chemical extremes that they required additional burning sensations to detect flavor at all. Dr. Vasquez had begun making notes in a small device, apparently documenting the morning's interactions. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been recording everyone's reactions for our cultural exchange database. This kind of cross-species dietary sharing is fascinating from an anthropological standpoint." She was treating their obvious terror as academic curiosity. She was studying them while they struggled to process the impossibility of human physiology. The Celestian delegate, a being called Luminarch Veltar, finally managed to project a coherent thought. "Your species consumes thermal energy, corrosive acids, concentrated toxins, and biological warfare agents as standard nutrition. How is this possible?" "Oh, you mean the heat and acid content?" Ambassador Chen looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Humans evolved on Earth over millions of years. Our digestive systems adapted to process a pretty wide range of substances. Most of what we eat would probably seem extreme to species from more gentle environments." Gentle environments. She was referring to the homeworlds of the galaxy's most feared warrior species as gentle. "But the temperature alone," Commander Thexera insisted, "the coffee was hot enough to cause tissue damage." General Rodriguez laughed. "That's nothing. You should see what happens when we cook with really hot oil. Water boils at 100 degrees, but we regularly work with oils heated to over 200 degrees. Makes the best fried foods." They subjected their nutrition to temperatures that could liquefy most biological tissues, and they did this because it improved the taste. The implications were staggering. If humans could casually consume substances and temperatures that would injure or kill other species, what were their actual physical limitations? How much damage could beings who drank acid and ate fire actually sustain? What would it take to actually threaten creatures who had evolved to thrive on controlled violence? Warlord Graxtor voiced what everyone was thinking. "What do you eat when you want something truly challenging?" The three humans exchanged glances, and something passed between them that made every warrior in the room feel a chill of premonition. "Well, Dr. Vasquez said slowly, There are some traditional dishes that might be a bit much for this setting. Hakarl from Iceland, durian fruit, century eggs, blue cheese. The translation units gave up entirely on several of these terms, simply displaying unknown biological hazard and unclassifiable organic weapon. But those are more cultural specialty items, Ambassador Chen added quickly. Nothing we'd inflict on guests without proper preparation and medical supervision. Medical supervision. Their extreme cuisine required medical oversight for safety. The room fell silent again as the full implications sank in. These weren't just survivors of a death world. They were apex predators who had evolved so far beyond normal biological limitations that their casual daily routine would be considered military-grade endurance testing for other species. And tomorrow, they would all sit down to negotiate territorial disputes and peace treaties with creatures who consumed chemical weapons for breakfast and considered it a light meal. For the first time in galactic history, every major warrior species in the room reached the same conclusion simultaneously. Maybe territorial disputes weren't worth fighting humans over. Ambassador Chen finished her coffee and smiled pleasantly at the assembly. Well, shall we head to the first negotiation session? I think this is going to be a very productive conference. As the humans gathered their things and headed toward the conference rooms with casual confidence, 12 delegations of the galaxy's most feared warriors remained seated, motionless, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The negotiations that followed were the most peaceful and cooperative in recorded galactic history.